What's the latest in the Israel-Hamas war? While all attention in the past week has been given to the death of Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar, there have been major developments in a series of other fronts. Fighting has continued to escalate in Lebanon, and intensive fighting and airstrikes have also been occurring throughout the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The United States has threatened to withhold weapon shipments to Israel if the humanitarian situation in northern Gaza is not improved, while a major shakeup in Egypt's intelligence ministry could have important implications on the hostage and ceasefire negotiations. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive deep into the latest on the Israel-Hamas war. Over the past week, the vast majority of attention has been placed, understandably, on the death of Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar in the Gaza Strip. If you're interested in more information about Sinwar's death and how this might impact the war and the trajectories, I'll direct you now to two videos I uploaded on October 17th and October 18th about this. Here, however, I'm going to focus on other developments from the past week that have been somewhat sidelined by the news. Starting with the Lebanese front, over the past week there have been continuous escalations in both IDF attacks throughout Lebanon and in Hezbollah rocket and missile fire towards Israel. Hundreds of rockets have been fired each day by Hezbollah, targeting a range of cities in the northern parts and central parts of Israel. And in turn, the IDF airstrikes have been targeting Hezbollah operatives, leaders, and weapons warehouses throughout Lebanon, in most cases well over 100 to 150 airstrikes each day, ranging from the Bekaa Valley to Beirut to southern Lebanon. Some specific highlighted events from the past week. On Wednesday, there were major airstrikes of the IDF that targeted facilities of Hezbollah in the Dahya region of Beirut. Reportedly, these were targeting underground facilities of the main intelligence networks of Hezbollah. On that same day, Hezbollah's division commander of the entire Kana region, Jalal Mustafa Hariri, was also assassinated. In a separate incident on Saturday, as part of ongoing firing of rockets and missiles by Hezbollah, 3 suicide drones were launched from Lebanon, targeting Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's private residence in Caesarea. 2 of the drones were intercepted, but one did manage to penetrate the defense networks and crashed into the Prime Minister's residence, reportedly while Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his family were not present in that house. Israel's security establishment confirmed that the incident is being treated as an assassination attempt of the Prime Minister, and this has led to a series of threatening messages that have been distributed by the Prime Minister's office and by Netanyahu himself, all saying that they will not be deterred and that the assassination attempt will be met with a harsh retaliation. There have been different statements since then that have been suggesting that the order to launch those drones to attempt to assassinate Prime Minister Netanyahu came directly from Iran. However, these have been unsubstantiated. Iran has repeatedly stated that those drones were launched solely by Hezbollah. Today, October 20th, the IDF announced that it was going to be launching a series of major airstrikes targeting Hezbollah's financial institutions. The target of the IDF airstrikes appear to be the Al-Qard al-Hassan. This is a Hezbollah-affiliated financial institution operating as a pseudo-alternative banking system within Lebanon. The Al-Qard al-Hassan entity, which has 31 branches throughout Lebanon, became increasingly popular among the Lebanese population over the last 5 years, especially as the Lebanese currency saw massive inflation and the banking system became very unstable. The Al-Qard al-Hassan remained fairly stable, primarily because it continues to have backing from Iran. The institution is also the only one in Lebanon that offers no interest loans. This is part of the Islamic law that forbids interest-bearing loans that will be given by banks. That is one of the reasons that the institution, which is one of Hezbollah's main economic operations, has also become very popular among the broader Lebanese population. Immediately after the IDF's announcements, evacuation orders were issued to all Lebanese civilians residing in the vicinity of any Al-Qard al-Hassan financial establishments, and major airstrikes were reported in the last several hours throughout Beirut and in different regions in Lebanon. Sky News in Arabic also reported that, among others, a hospital in the eastern parts of Baalbek was being evacuated, as an Al-Qard al-Hassan branch was also adjacent to it. Meanwhile, in an attempt to somewhat spiral down the situation between Israel and Lebanon, both France and the United States have been pressuring the Israeli and Lebanese government to agree on a diplomatic resolution to the situation. Relating to this, on October 15th, Naim Qassem, who is Hassan Nasrallah's deputy and the person who is now de facto in charge of Hezbollah at the moment at least, gave another speech in which he repeated some of Nasrallah's rhetoric throughout the war, emphasizing that the quote-unquote Lebanese front is tied to the quote-unquote Gaza front, and that there's been a lot of pressure on Hezbollah to stop the fighting, however, that they are linked to the ongoing war in Palestine. Unlike the speeches that were given by Nasrallah, however, it is important to note that Qasem again stated that Hezbollah is willing to progress towards a ceasefire that would be brokered by the Lebanese government. He did not condition this on a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, which is different than the way Hassan Nasrallah had been talking throughout the entire war. At the same time, he said that there would need to be a complete cessation of fire before negotiating terms of an agreement. This is something that Israel has said it is not going to accept, and it is very unlikely that Israel will accept. However, the fact that Qasem is on the one hand still repeating Nasrallah's rhetoric about the linking of the fronts, however, at the same time, is also saying, but Hezbollah is willing to look to a ceasefire, does signal, I would argue, at least some deviation from the way Nasrallah, at least, was running the war thus far. Turning to the Gaza Strip, there has been a substantial increase in the intensity of fighting in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip over the last several weeks, constituting possibly the most intensive fighting in that area since the withdrawal of the IDF from that region in December last year. As a reminder, the IDF stated 2 weeks ago that it was launching an operation in Jabalia refugee camp in order to tackle Hamas's attempt to rebuild itself in that area. The military has been increasingly pouring more and more troops into the region, as the Al-Qassam brigades have also seemingly been thickening their ranks, all bracing for this developing fight and arena in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Evacuation orders have been issued by the IDF to many areas around Jabalia refugee camp as well. These include areas of Zaytun, Beit Lahia, as well as other areas in Gaza City. Among these significant events, and there's been intensive fighting being reported there almost every day, on the night between October 19th and October 20th, a massive airstrike occurred in the Beit Lahia region, reportedly targeting a multi-story residential building. Palestinian sources reported that between 40 to 60 people were killed in this attack, while the Palestinian Health Ministry reported that it estimates between the bodies that have been extracted and those buried under the rubble, that upwards of 80 people may have been killed in that attack. The IDF reported that numbers that are being disseminated by Palestinian sources are being inflated, and that precision weaponry was used in this attack. However, the IDF did not make explicitly clear what that attack was targeting. In a separate incident on the night before, major strikes also were reported in the areas around the Indonesian hospital in Jabalia refugee camp. 33 Palestinians were reportedly killed as the IDF was besieging that hospital. The IDF did report that Hamas had been re-establishing its headquarters in the different hospitals in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Presumably, this is part of the IDF attempt to root out Hamas attempting to re-establish itself. That fighting, according to reports around the Indonesian hospital, is still ongoing. In addition to this, several high-profile deaths occurred in the Gaza Strip in the last week. These include IDF Armored Division Commander Ahsan Daksa, who was killed by an anti-tank missile in the northern parts of Gaza, and the assassination of Mahmoud Hamdan, the commander of Hamas's Tel Sultan Brigade. Daksa is the most senior IDF officer that was killed in the fighting in the Gaza Strip thus far. Only one other officer of that rank was killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began. In addition to all this, both the Al-Qassam brigades and the IDF have continuously reported intensive fighting that has been happening in the El Maghazi refugee camp in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, as well as fighting that is continuing to happen in the Tel Sultan region of Rafah. Regarding casualties in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting that 42,603 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and 99,975 have been injured thus far. As a reminder, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip does not distinguish between civilians and militants. It simply counts all the amount of people that have been killed in the Gaza Strip and have been brought through Palestinian hospitals. The IDF has reported over the last several weeks that it estimates that between 14,000 and 17,000 Palestinian militants have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began. In turn, the IDF is reporting that 356 IDF soldiers have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began of the Gaza Strip almost exactly a year ago, and that 2,356 IDF soldiers have been injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began. Meanwhile, turning to some news from the humanitarian front over the past week, on Tuesday, the United States administration issued an unusual ultimatum stating that weapons shipments to Israel may be canceled or withheld if the humanitarian situation in the northern part of the Gaza Strip is not immediately alleviated. The administration cited legal restrictions within U.S. law that prohibits the transfer of weaponry to foreign countries where humanitarian law is not upheld, and said that the ultimatum has a 30-day deadline after which these weapon shipments may be canceled or withheld if the humanitarian situation does not improve in the northern parts of the Strip. Now, just for some context of what has happened in the humanitarian front, the entrance of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and particularly the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, decreased quite dramatically throughout September and specifically over the last several weeks. While several people have cited different proposed plans within Israel to drive Palestinians out of northern Gaza, it appears, at least officially, and from the evidence that is accumulated, that the decline is a result of a combination of factors and mismanagement that have come together, rather than an organized concrete plan. Among others, several weeks ago, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had ordered the IDF to begin developing plans to take over the distribution of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip. This happened despite the military's stern warnings against such a move. As part of this plan, and despite the fact that it has not been implemented yet, the private organizations within Gaza that have been employed in delivering aid once it enters the Gaza Strip have slowly been phased out as part of the process after it was determined that they are prone to smuggling and black market activity. Meanwhile, as a result of the expansion of the IDF activity in Jabalia refugee camp and throughout northern Gaza, the Erez crossing, that is the main crossing into the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, has been closed, and this, combined with closures in southern Gaza, led to an average of 30 to 50 trucks entering the Gaza Strip per day over the last 2 weeks, as opposed to a previous average of some 350 trucks per day. Following the U.S. ultimatum, the Israeli cabinet met on October 18th, and Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered the immediate entrance of over 258 trucks into the northern Gaza Strip each day. That into itself may not suffice to live up to the U.S. ultimatum. We will see what happens in the coming days. In addition to this, on the humanitarian front, Oxfam reported that 4 of its employees working on water engineering projects were killed in Khan Yunis on October 20th after their marked vehicle was fired upon by the IDF, despite the fact that they had coordinating their activities with the military in that sector. The IDF responded, stating that it is aware of tank fire that occurred in that area and that claims are being investigated. And finally, 2 more relevant pieces of news that have gone somewhat under the radar over the past week. On Wednesday, it was reported that Abbas Kamel, the Egyptian head of intelligence and a major figure in the negotiations in the war thus far, has been appointed as special advisor to President al-Sisi and the general coordinator of security matters in Egypt. This means that he will no longer be in the role of the head of intelligence ministry. This may have crucial importance for the war, as Kamel has served in this role since 2018 and has cultivated a surprisingly good and trusting relationship both with the Israeli intelligence branches as well as with Hamas and other Palestinian factions in Gaza. He was instrumental in negotiating with Hamas and Israel the different ceasefires and different truces and even momentary truces, such as that happened with the polio vaccine campaign that occurred and different things like that. Throughout the war, he's often managed to pressure both sides into certain moves at critical junctures. His replacement, Hassan Mahmoud Rashad, served in many different positions in the Egyptian military. However, he does not have the diplomatic background that Abbas Kamel had. The head of the Israeli Shabak, Ronen Bar, reportedly traveled to Egypt on October 20th in order to meet with Rashad in order to begin discussions on the hostage negotiations. I mentioned this now. That is not actually any piece of news with regards to the negotiations. There are no active negotiations right now. However, that replacement that occurred in Egypt may end up having a critical impact on the way negotiations develop in the future. And finally, with regards to the future leader of Hamas, Ashaq al-Awsat reported on October 19th that Hamas has decided to keep the identity of the new leader in secret, both in order to facilitate with his safety as well as to confuse Israel with regards to who is making the decisions in the negotiations. I've mentioned in my previous recordings that the replacement is very likely to either be Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of Yahya Sinwar, or Khalid Mashal, who resides in Qatar. However, the report also implied that the identity of the next leader has not yet been decided by the organization. Those are my highlights from the past week. If you find this informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn notifications so you know when reports come out. Please send these on to anyone you think might be interested in the war. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.